Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. I'm so glad to be back with you. I've been off all week, so you've probably heard a few repeats of my stories from old stories because we have got so many stories on the Saroy channel, so we're spoilt for choice. But I have to say I've missed you guys so much, and it was just so awful. I was completely flattened by this most awful flu virus that literally knocked me for six. And I lost the hearing in both of my ears. That has never happened to me before. So that was bizarre because I couldn't hear anything. Now, of course, both of the ears have popped and I can hear absolutely well again. And it was one of those ghastly flu viruses, and I couldn't speak very clearly because I completely lost my voice. So it was actually not a choice of mine not to be able to record last week because I just couldn't have done so. So I'm glad to be back with you, but I still feel exhausted. I feel as if I've been run over by a forklift a forklift truck. So yeah, I'm just so thrilled to be back, and lots of love to everyone. And if any of you out there, with the change of season, so many of us have been getting sick. That's what happens at this time of the year. And I just hope that you're keeping yourself lovely and warm, and you're dosing yourself with hot toddies and everything you need to keep your strength up, because the immune system can take a bit of a battering. And I think after so long when we've been around, after the virus, everybody was walking around with, scarves around their faces, masks on. And so now we're much more exposed to the flu, because this was definitely not coronavirus or anything like that. It was just one of those very strong flus going around. Anyway, as I say, I'm glad to be back with you. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with a lovely new story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, my grandfather gazed up wistfully at the stars in the velvety black sky, of which there were so many, too many to count. Then he dropped his steely gaze and stared at the frolicking flames bouncing over the wood in the fire pit, as the fire merrily crackled and popped, and red flames sparked between the blistering wood. My grandfather knew he had an audience, as I'd invited my 3 friends, James MacFellin, Thomas Maxwell, and Ernest Farrell, over to my home for a sleepover, and we'd been permitted to camp in the yard only about 50 feet away from the house, so that my grandmother could keep her beady eyes on us. My grandfather, like so many from his generation, was a great storyteller, for he came from a time where storytelling was the most reliable form of entertainment, and from when I was very little, I preferred to listen to my grandfather's story than to anything on television, as what he had to tell us was infinitely more interesting and captivating, always holding our attention. As soon after his story, me and my friends would still be talking about the things he'd told us, and I cannot say the same for any television program that we watched at the time. Me and my friends were not sure what story my grandfather would tell us this evening, for he had so many stories in his repertoire, of both fictitious and true stories, and usually we were open to hearing anything, providing, of course, it was entertaining. And when you're sitting by a campfire eating s'mores, you're looking to be entertained. It was so beautiful out there in the yard, surrounded by the comforting sounds of nature, which included the orchestra of crickets and frogs, along with the occasional distant hoot from an owl. But out here in Appalachia, we were perfectly accustomed to hearing animal sounds that we could not always identify. Hauntingly airy, spooky sounds that might make a city dweller wake up in bed with a start, with their hair lightly standing on end, as they pondered to themselves, "What the hell was that?" Me and my friends, having been born and bred out here, we've become used to the abnormal and the idiosyncratic, crossing the threshold of our lives, more often than we care to mention. If you'd lived out here for long enough, you'd likely have a story to tell of some kind that erred on the side of the unusual. I was 9.5 years old to be precise, when my grandfather told me and my friends his story. I had a sense that out here, surrounded by the all-encompassing wilderness, there were probably things living in our midst that we were completely clueless about. You'd have to be ignorant to assume otherwise, as there are vast stretches of uncharted wilderness all over America that have yet to be explored, and Appalachia is no exception to that rule. Over the years, people from many generations here in Appalachia have stories to tell of unusual cryptid creatures, ghostly entities, and strange light orbs that are seen floating through the woods. There are so many unusual stories, in fact, that literally the unusual is not that uncommon in this part of the world. On this pleasantly serene night, a soft, gentle wind blew against our faces, as our eyes focused on our grandfather, who had lit up his pipe and was blowing puffs of billowing white smoke into the atmosphere, so that it dissipated in the wind. I used to love the aromatic smell of my grandfather's tobacco, and even when I think of that smell, it becomes quite nostalgic for me. My grandfather was in his 90s. He was 20 years older than my grandmother, so the generation gap between the two of them was substantial. So it was a given that my grandfather would go long before my grandmother, unless, of course, fate had other ideas for them. Their unlikely love story began when my grandmother was charmed by the attentions that she'd received from an older man. Within days of meeting my grandfather, she got married to him, which is just as well, or I might never have been born. My grandfather popped the question to my grandmother on the second date. I think he said something like, "I think the two of us would fit together very nicely. Do you fancy making a go of it?" My grandmother said she needed to think about his proposal, because it had caught her off guard. But at the end of the dinner, she had said to him, "Why not? I kind of like you. There's no reason why it couldn't work." My grandfather thought that was a promising start to a brand new beginning. So yes, he was much older than her. But back in the day it was quite the compliment for an older man showing you interest, if you were younger, that is. I think it made my grandmother feel sophisticated and mature, as all her girlfriends were dating men of similar age to themselves, and were envious of the attention my grandfather lavished on her, as he was a very handsome gentleman. My grandmother was to discover on meeting her in-laws that she happened to be a dead ringer for my grandfather's mother. They could quite literally have been sisters, so maybe men do marry women that rather remind them of their mothers. It would seem that despite the age differences, my grandparents loved the bones of each other, and within a year they were very much in love. For a man of his advancing years, my grandfather was sturdy on his feet and robustly healthy. Over many years he'd worked as a motor repairman, usually repairing mining motors among other things, for the coal mining industry that at one time had been booming. I think my grandfather had worked long and hard, getting his hands filthy dirty and his heart pumping vigorously, that his physique was still in excellent shape, almost as if his body had forgotten how old he actually was. My grandfather was the only father figure I'd ever known in my life, ostensibly like so many people in Appalachia. When I was born, I was badly affected by my mother's indulgent drug habit. I was actually addicted to heroin. My mother had experimented with all manner of drugs, not bothering at all that she was pregnant with me. In the beginning it was marijuana, then it was oxycodone, pain meds, methamphetamines, and finally heroin, which was my mother's go-to drug that her body ravenously craved. This explained why I was born half the size of a normal baby. Indeed, I was so fragile, the doctors were not sure I'd survive the night. I surprised them all, as I was a tenacious little thing, determined to make my place in the world no matter what. My grandmother was afraid to hold me, lest I should break. "Look what your drugs did to the baby," she said to my mother. "Your son could have died in your womb because of your drug habit. You have not thought about your baby for this entire pregnancy. How can you be so dreadfully selfish?" My mother's curt reply was, "It's not my fault he chose to be born. I didn't ask for him, did I? If you got an issue with my having a baby, take it up with God." My mother was a hardened drug user. She had absolutely no interest in me from the get-go. She didn't even bother to name me, so my grandmother chose to call me Emmett Howard Fromage. To all intents and purposes, when drugs consume your life, the only thing you care about is accomplishing your next high. Nothing else matters. And it's amazing the industrious things drug addicts will actually do to raise the funds to acquire their drugs, for they absolutely have to satisfy the addiction, no matter what, which becomes like an itch you have to scratch, and cannot ignore. When I was born, my mother practically dumped me in my grandmother's lap. When my grandparents visited her in hospital and said, "Since you like him as much as you do, he's yours," and she left the hospital forthwith, within hours of having birthed me, to seek her next high. I've never been offended by her blatant disregard of me, as having lived in Appalachia, I've seen firsthand what drugs do to people, and they turn many people into zombies, especially if you're indulging in the hardened drugs. There are, of course, people I know, from all walks of life, that manage their drug habit while they actually work, as a school teacher or a mechanic or something like that. But it has a lot to do with the kind of drugs they're taking, and their own body's reaction to the drugs. But everyone knows getting addicted to any kind of drug is a slippery slope, and out here in Appalachia, it's a huge problem. I have no idea who my father is, which is why it's a mystery that has confounded my life, as everyone likes to know where they come from. Regretfully, my mother would sell her body for money in order to support her habit, and I suspect my father was one of my mother's many clients. Some might describe him as a sperm donor, if you're being brutally unkind, that is. I often wondered if he realized he'd sired a child he knew absolutely nothing about. Probably not. Here in Appalachia, there's a huge increase in prostitution for this very reason, as women desperately want to support their drug habit. So selling their body indiscriminately is a way of gaining the funds they need. Because when you're desperate for drugs, your code of ethics goes down the plug hole with the dirty bathwater. I know people here that do anything they can to pay for drugs, and when I say anything, some of it is not pretty at all. I was an accident that my mother had never anticipated, which is just as well, as I have absolutely no doubt she would likely have aborted me if she'd discovered she was pregnant with me. But I still think it's debatable whether she'd have been responsible enough to even go to the clinic to address her pregnancy in the first place. Like so many who are nursing a drug addiction, my mother's life was plagued by denial, avoidance, and apathetic insouciance. I understand she didn't realize she was pregnant until 7 months down the line, as due to her drug habit, her pregnancy bump was so tiny and inconspicuous it was barely discernible. I suspect my mother thought she just picked up a wee bit of weight, but I understand she was painfully thin, so even a tiny bulge on her body must have been blindingly obvious to most. When she realized she was pregnant, thanks to my grandmother, who knew at once what the telltale bump on my mother's belly actually was, it was too late in the day for her to get rid of me. But even after it was affirmed by the doctor that she was indeed with child, she never received any prenatal care, nor did she attend any checkups or even try to address her drug addiction. No matter how much my grandmother persuaded her to take care of her health because she was carrying an unborn child inside her belly. In truth, she might as well have been talking to a brick wall, as my mother cared not for the life growing inside her, probably because she didn't care about herself either, which spoke volumes. When it came to my mother, like any other drug addict, the only thing you focus on is your next fix. Nothing else mattered. My grandparents had tried to get my mother help. Of course they had. But she didn't desire to abandon her habit, and there's nothing you can do to impose your will on another. So my grandparents knew that my mother's days were numbered, and they were not wrong about that, as there's only so much abuse you can put on the human body before it begins to fight back and says enough is enough, and finally begins to shut down. I have seen this too often here in Appalachia. Too many wasted lives stolen by drugs. If people knew what drugs did to their bodies, they'd never even take their first drug. But the dealers from the drug cartels are cunningly clever, and they try all the tricks in the book, like lacing the joints with hardened drugs so that you quickly get addicted. As a consequence, you'll likely think that the joint you smoked happened to make you feel really, really good, and you want more where that came from. So the dealer will tell you what was in the joint, and then slowly but surely you find yourself sucked into an addiction you never for a moment saw coming. When I was 3 years old, my mother was found lying dead in an abandoned house, of which there are many in Appalachia. By all accounts, when the coal mining industry sadly went into rapid decline, which was the lifeblood of a once thriving, prosperous community, on which so many people depended, Boutiques, restaurants, diners and coffee shops folded. The Walmart closed, which really was the beginning of the end, as you had to go further afield to get to a big store, or otherwise you'd have to make do with buying snacks from a mini-mart. So many houses that belonged to the coal mining managers and people of affluence at the time, that were like grand mansions with stunning architecture, were abandoned. So Appalachia soon became like a ghost town, as the people left thanks to the government's insistence on shutting down the mines, as it was believed that mining coal was not good for the environment. Such actions desolated the people in my part of the world, many that would be starving were it not for coal. I think the mass exodus of so many people, especially young people, leaving our part of the world, gave rise to a deep depression, a sense of abandonment, loneliness, boredom, which might have been the catalyst for so many turning to drugs. Not that I'm trying to make excuses for people, because in my grandfather's day, people never got bored or unsatisfied with their lives, as they are now. Some say that our lifestyles have turned us away from the natural world and vandalized the free spirit within us. So yes, my mother was sadly found in one of those desolate houses, with a needle halfway stuck in her arm. It really was tragic. The coroner said that it wasn't actually the drugs that killed my mother, but a weakened heart that gave out due to the overuse of drugs on her system. Finally her body just packed up like an old washing machine that had had enough of washing soiled garments, and reluctantly just gave up the ghost. My grandmother informed me that my mother's body could have rotted away in this abandoned building for months on end, never to be found, had it not been for a lucky chance encounter by two backpackers from Ireland. They were tackling a nearby trail and walked past the house, alerting the police to a foul smell that needed investigation, as one of the backpackers knew what that smell was, as he'd worked in a mortuary before. My mother's tragic demise cut my grandparents to the quick, but her fate was inevitable, if you pursue drugs as a recreational activity, that is, especially cutthroat drugs like heroin and cocaine. Let's just say there are no happy endings, unless you get help in time. And for many people in our part of the world, they don't actually want help. It's like the drugs gives them an excuse to escape from the responsibility of life. Having said that, I do know of many people who have courageously given up drugs, but every day is a perennial struggle to overcome the longing that they have to go back to the habit. But everyone knows once you give up drugs and return to them the second time around, then it's 1,000 times worse. Growing up, my grandfather had an amazing thick shock of white hair. It was absolutely magnificent, and there was no sign of a receding hairline. He had a full white beard, along with a distinguished walrus moustache. At one point in time, he claimed he'd won first prize for the most esteemed moustache in a competition in Appalachia. The competition took place in 1962, and there had been a sign up in the post office saying, "Have you got it in you to grow an outstanding esteemed moustache? If you do, you stand to win a fabulous cash prize." My grandfather got first prize for the most venerable aristocratic moustache, and people entered from all over the country, and with the money he was able to buy a stunning-looking black buick, which he kept running for over 40 years. At the time my grandfather's celebrated moustache was seen in many commercials on television. Ever since that time, he had fastidiously kept the moustache manicured and pristine, so much so that when I was little, people would stop him in the middle of the street and say, "Sir, I really like your moustache. How do I grow one like that? Can you give me some tips?" My grandfather would give them some advice, and many attempted to grow a moustache like my grandfather's, with a little measure of success, for nobody could grow a moustache quite like him. All eyes were on my grandfather, as he blew out wisps of smoke into the dark night, as me and my friends waited in excited anticipation for a story. Grandma rose, shook her head and said, "Oh, for goodness sake, Howard, get on with it, will you? The children are dying to hear your story. Don't keep them in suspense. You really are the end like that." It was James Macpherson that said to my grandfather, "Please, Mr. Fromage, please will you tell us a very, very scary story? A true scary story. Do you have a scary story to tell us, Mr. Fromage? I like scary stories. My grandfather's blue eyes, that were incredibly pale, were feathered by a road map of wizened fine lines. They grew as wide as saucers at my friend's remark. You want me to tell you a true scary story, do you? You're camping in the yard tonight, in a tent, I'd like to remind you, he told him gingerly. I mean, is that a good idea? What if you fail to get a good night's sleep, lying there in your sleeping bags? My story might give you nightmares. I wouldn't want to be responsible for depriving you of a good night's sleep. We all chorused that we wanted a true scary story, and we didn't care about not being able to get to sleep. And then my grandfather ran a hand through his beard, tugging it like a church bell, as if undecided whether to oblige our request or not. Go on, sweetheart, be a sport. If they want to hear a scary story, give it to them. If they're scared during the night, it's not a train smash, you know. They can abandon their campsite and come back indoors. They can sleep in the bedroom there. You know, children, how much they love scary stories. Don't deprive them of that fun. How about you tell them what happened to you and your brother when you were boys? Now that was a hell of a scary story if ever I heard one. Very well. I will tell you a scary story. It'll make the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end, my grandfather told us. Do you want to hear that? He asked us. Yes, please, we chorused enthusiastically, clapping our hands in delight. My grandfather reflectively blew out a puff of his smoke, so it spiraled into the ether and eventually dissipated. With eyes fixed on the flames of the fire, he said, Let's get started, shall we? As I was telling you, I'll give you a story that'll knock the socks off you and challenge everything you thought you knew about this world of ours. As you know, I grew up here in Appalachia, not very far from where we live now. And life back in those days was very, very hard indeed. I had 4 brothers and 3 sisters, as my mother kept bringing more and more children into the world, which was rather incredulous. We were reasonably well off compared to some other people in these parts, but we were not immune to our own financial struggles. But despite everything, we loved each other very much, and what we lacked for in money, we made up with plenty of love. As children, we would spend an infinite amount of time out of doors. We had not the modern conveniences of the internet or television in those days, but I think we were happier than kids today. I really do. Many who seem to have lost their purpose, hence the huge problems with drugs these days. We kept ourselves fully entertained all day long, sometimes playing around the place in our bare feet. We lived in a cabin in the woods, and during the winter my mother would line our walls with newspaper to insulate the entire house. My father would chop so much firewood. If you looked outside the window, there was a pile of chopped wood that resembled the Leaning Tower of Pisa. It was quite spectacular. Me and my 4 brothers shared a large bed together. We were young at the time. It was comfortable sharing a bed together and very warm during the winter months. But when we got bigger, we had to make other sleeping arrangements, because 5 boys sharing a bed together just wasn't going to work long term. One night when we were sleeping, my brother Martin began to shake me out of my slumber, and that was a mission for him, for I was a very deep sleeper. Still am, as it happens. Me and my brother Martin were very similar in age. I think there was only 18 months between us. We did everything together. My other 3 brothers remained fast asleep in bed, but Martin did not wake them up. My brother was shaking like a leaf, pointing at the window, his eyes wide with terror, so I knew at once something was up. We did not have the luxury of curtains in our cabin, as that was something we could ill afford. It was a bright night, thanks to a full moon subduing the darkness. "What's wrong?" I asked my brother.
He failed to answer my question, but continued to shake. I looked up towards the window, as that was where my brother was looking, and then I was filled with terror, as my heart began to boom in my little chest, and every hair on the back of my neck was standing up on end. My first thought was, what the hell is that? For I saw a huge human-like face peering in at us at the window. I do remember the face was huge, the forehead heavily wrinkled, the eyes hooded and deep-set, and the aquatic nose very flat. But this being, whatever it was completely covered in hair, and was substantial in size and girth. He took up the entire window, and this thing was hunched over, peering in at us, like a giant looking in at the dolls in a doll's house. It was rather like that. We felt conspicuously small, very vulnerable. We knew this thing had to be huge. He was pressed against the window, his nose smudging that glass pane. And when I saw the intimidating large face and the wide dark eyes, I screamed in terror, so I woke everybody up in the entire household without apology. My father came barreling into the bedroom with a shotgun in his hand. He was out of breath, his whole body shaking like a leaf. My screams were apparently that dreadful. I think he thought I'd been attacked by something, only to discover that I was screaming at what he perceived was nothing at all, but probably just a figment of a highly fertile, inventive, childlike imagination that could entertain all kinds of incredulous inventions. I knew very differently, of course. So did my brother. I suspect he was not best pleased to be woken up in the middle of the night, to have his sleep disturbed by my hysterical outburst, and seemed far from amused by the incident. So were my 4 brothers, who woke up in a state of panic and started screaming in response to my screams. They were wondering what was going on. My older brother, who was easily spooked, was also crying. "What the hell is all this commotion about, Harold?" asked my father. All I could do was point at the window. "What on earth is going on in here, Harold?" asked my mother, who entered the room looking like someone had punched her brutally across the face. She appeared bewildered and thrown out of her comfort zone. Her troubled brown eyes were wide with concern. "Me and your father, Harold, we thought you were being murdered, son." She patted her chest as if soothing her heart. "Oh, goodness, you scared me, sweetheart. Please don't ever scream like that again. I don't think my heart could handle it. What on earth is wrong? Did you have a nightmare or something? You look spooked. Your face is so white. You're shaking." My mother took me into her arms to try and console me. She rocked me gently against her chest. There, she said gently. "I know nightmares can be alarming, but you're safe now. But don't ever do that again, love. Oh, you gave me the shock of my life." "It wasn't a nightmare. There was a face at the window. I promise you there was a face at the window. This thing, it was so big. It had such huge eyes, black eyes. It was looking in at us. It was very, very big." My mother released me from her hold and promptly walked over to the window, looking out of the glass pane. "Honestly, Harold, love, you do worry about absolutely nothing. I can assure you nothing is there. It must have been your imagination, or you've just had a very vivid, lucid nightmare, that's all. You'll be surprised how graphic our imaginations can be at times. I'm sure it was absolutely nothing. Do you know, when I was your age, I was scared of my own shadow. Now, why don't you go back to sleep? How about I tuck you up into bed and read you all a nice story?" "But there was a face at the window," said my brother Martin. "I saw it as well. I was the one that saw it first, and I pointed it out to Howard. It was there. We're not making it up, Mummy. Cross my heart. Hope to die." At that startling revelation, my mother's brown eyes met my father's blue ones, and a silent communication ensued between the two of them. My mother looked nonplussed, because the two of us had the same nightmare, and that made no sense to her at all. "You must never talk like that, Martin," my mother scolded. "Your word is enough for me. I don't want you swearing in the name of the Lord. Even so, I'm sure you saw nothing at the window," said my mother, sitting next to me by my side. At this point, my brothers were unduly alarmed, having heard that both me and Martin had seen a face at the window, so they became quite scared. "Don't you worry, sweethearts. Your brothers claim they saw a face at the window, but I'm sure it was nothing. Your father's going to check it out, aren't you, dear?" "That's right, I am, to allay your fears. But I assure you nothing is there. I'm certain of it." The suggestion that there had been a face at the window, seen by both me and Martin, brought pandemonium in our household, and by this time even the girls had been woken up, so everybody was very much on edge, as we waited for my father to come back from patrolling the premises. We could hear him walking around the cabin, his heavy boots grazing the stony pebbles. He investigated the entire property and promptly returned, saying there was nothing out there at all, and that we had nothing to worry about. Nothing had been remotely disturbed. Everybody calmed down significantly, and my brothers gave me and Martin a hard time for scaring them so needlessly. We were told we'd made the whole thing up. I think both my parents thought me and my brother Martin were simply feeding each other's imaginations, seeing things that weren't there. I even heard my mother tell my dad in a low voice that she suspected it was just a nightmare. "But my God," she said, "that scream of Howard's! He put the fear of God into me," she told him. "If he ever screams like that again, you'll have to ferry me away in an ambulance, because I will quite literally have a heart attack." "Kids will be kids," my father told her fondly. "At this age, you know what their imaginations are like. They're ripe with suggestion." I remember me and my brother felt significantly annoyed that no one believed our account, even when we pointed out the smudges on the outside window the following morning, which I suspect my family thought I'd put there myself. The very next night, verbatim, the same set of circumstances repeated themselves, like a video recording, where the screen replays. My brother woke me up, shaking with terror, pointing to the window, where I saw the face again. This time, against all the odds, I did not scream, but I was gobsmacked by the gargantuan thing that was staring in at us through the window, and this time he didn't seem to be going away, but just stood there, gawking at us. So there we are. That's the end of part 1 of our story. So I'm looking forward to you joining me tomorrow night. And do leave a comment, because I really enjoy hearing from you. Until next time, goodbye and good night.